Good afternoon. Welcome to our program today. My name is Hoda Mahmoudi. I'm the holder of the Baha'i Chair for World Peace, and along with Dr. Rayshan Ray, of the Critical Race Initiative, we would like to welcome all of you. We are co-sponsors of this program, and of course, we are in the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences at the University of Maryland. It is a great pleasure for me to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished members of the panel who will be introduced to you shortly. I would like to also take the opportunity to thank Dr. Kate Seaman, who is the Assistant Director at the Baha'i Chair, for all of the logistics in making today possible. And we have 2 students who are BSOS ambassadors, students who volunteer their time, who help us with making sure that these events run smoothly. Thank you very much in the back. You know, today's program is a part of our ongoing series on structural racism and the root cause of prejudice. We really find that this series has been extremely important for us in learning more about locating solutions, locating positive ways of dealing with the issue of structural racism and prejudice. And so what's unique about today's program is that it will, of course, first feature a speaker who will discuss a new report called Prince George's County Rising: Strategies for Equitable Development and Prosperity. And you probably have a little flyer on the chair that explains more about that. The report is from the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund. The fund's mission is to build social capital and invest in new approaches to solving social challenges in Prince George's County. The organization identifies appropriate models that support the county's infrastructure across public, private, religious, and nonprofit sectors for improved quality of life. We are especially excited today about our program because it connects the University of Maryland to the county, and our panel members also come both from the county and the university. University community engagements are extremely important as they outline and combine for us knowledge and experience from both entities to address a range of social issues and the promotion of equity, of opportunity, as well as in generating ideas and actions that promote an all-inclusive and fair society. So at this time, it is my pleasure to ask Dr. Reshan Ray to please come to the podium and introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Mahmoudi, thank you as always. The Baha'i Chair continues to engage in activities that are extremely relevant to the campus community, the county community, statewide, across the country, and even internationally. And so if you haven't been to the Baha'i Chair events, which typically have huge turnouts like this, I definitely think that's something you should do, because the Baha'i Chair is almost single-handedly leading in a lot of ways that we really want people to engage at the university and more broadly. And I think it's particularly relevant today, as an article just came out in the Washington Post that said the real-time impact of hate is easy to see at UMD. And I think we're all here because as we think about Prince George's County Rising, University of Maryland cannot continue to kind of go the route that it's going, particularly as it relates to Black enrollment. And I think Prince George's County is vital in terms of helping to change that direction. And I think that'll be part of the discussion today. I have the distinct honor of introducing our speaker this morning, who'll give a presentation on a report that you all should definitely look at from the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund. We've started up a partnership with the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund led by Tonya Wellens, who you'll hear from shortly. And these are definitely things that people want to pay attention to because they have relevancy to basically everyone in this room. And I think by the end of the event today, I think these are the sort of things that we'll see. Nonetheless, let me introduce Steve Brigham, who has been a leader in the public engagement field for over the past 2 decades. First in his role as COO and then president of America Speaks, and now is one of the 3 principals in public engagement associates He is also a board member of the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund. During his time throughout his advocacy, he's led or managed more than 200 public and stakeholder engagement projects in project design, public meeting design, and large and small group facilitation on a wide range of public policy and planning issues, including land use, youth development, mental health policy, disaster recovery, and several others. He's led stakeholder projects with the Washington, D.C. Mayor's Office, as well as with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, Howard County Department of Planning and Zoning, and a list of others, including the Purple Line Corridor Coalition, which is going to be running right outside of this particular building. Steve is happy to say that he and his family live in Prince George's County, where they've lived for over the past 20 years, and he remains committed to helping in terms of building the county in a more prosperous way that can lead to more equity for all of the residents who live here. So, Steve?
Thank you, Rayshawn, for that introduction, and it's great to be on campus. Fear the turtle, right? I used to live in College Park for 6 years when Maryland men and women won the national championship in basketball, and saw the celebrations out my door. So it's great to be back on campus. I also want to thank HODA for the opportunity to speak today, and for Dr. Ray for inviting, and for Tonya Wellens, who founder and board member of the Social Innovation Fund, that was great enough to publish the paper. Let me just say a couple of quick things about the Social Innovation Fund, building on what's already been said. So you heard about the mission. One of the signature initiatives of the Social Innovation Fund is the 40 Under 40 honoree program, where every year we celebrate 40 people under the age of 40 from across 6 sectors in the county, and kind of celebrate the leadership that they're providing to their sector and to the county. And actually, Dr. Ray was one of our honorees many, many, many years ago, right? But we look to connect those leaders to important leadership positions, especially serving on commissions and boards of directors in the county and around the region. We are advocates for a number of different things, including more entrepreneurship in the county, art that can be an economic driver, greater resources to public education, and second chances for our residents. And we're really big, I don't know how many of you are workers here that have to commute out, but 70% of our residents in Prince George's County commute out every single day, which is much higher than the regional average. And we're looking to find ways to have more jobs here, more good jobs here, so that fewer and fewer people are doing the outward commute. And then we see ourselves as a think and do tank, and this paper really comes out of the think side of things, but we hope to turn it into the do side of things. So this paper really was a labor of love, and I mean that sincerely. I spent 6 months writing what turned out originally was going to be a 25-page paper, ended up being a 180-page paper, and then to have to boil it down to a 15-minute presentation is a real challenge. But I'm here to make that happen. So the reason why I wrote the paper was really out of excitement and concern. Excitement that I believe finally, in the last decade, Prince George's County is more poised to take advantage of the assets we have and become a real player on the regional and hopefully national stage. And at the same time, I feared and continue to fear that we are going to make many of the same mistakes that many other urban and suburban cities and counties do, in terms of especially displacing thousands of people like happened in Washington, D.C. over the last 2 decades. So this paper really is about how do we put the policies, practices, programs, et cetera, in place so that we don't repeat the mistakes of others. How do we do it differently? So first, we need to define, so what do we mean by equity? And so this paper really is about racial equity, economic equity, but predominantly racial equity. And so we define that, or using a definition from Aspen Institute, when people in society have equal chances to reach their full potential and are no more likely to encounter life's burdens or benefits just because of the color of their skin. And as we all know, we do not live anywhere close to a racially equitable society historically and today, and we need to figure out ways to make it far more equitable across racial lines. A book that you might want to take a look at if you're really interested in the topics that we talked tonight that had a major influence on actually getting me to write this paper was a book by Richard Rothstein called The Color of Law, which really takes a look at all of the policies and laws that were put in place in the early 20th century from federal on down to the community level that basically created an even more hyper-segregated society for decades and decades in this country. And then even when the laws and policies began to change in the 60s and 70s, we still live with that legacy even 50 years later. So I highly recommend the book, and it really kind of shaped a lot of what the paper ultimately talks about. So although I don't focus on this a whole lot in the paper, given the kind of the focus of today, I thought it was really important that we understand kind of how Prince George's County has changed in the last 50 or 60 years to become kind of who we are today. So 60 years ago, 1960, the county was 90% white and only 10% African American. And over the course of about 40 years, it shifted to being a majority African American county, and where there was now about a third of residents were white, and we were beginning to see Hispanic and Asians also move into the county. And then when you look at where we are today, I think these statistics are from 2016, the black population is almost 2/3, but the white population is only 13%, and I believe in the 2020 census it'll probably be closer to about 10%. So this is a phenomenon that probably you're all aware of that has happened all across the country around white flight, and that white flight really began around the time of the desegregation of schools in the county and elsewhere. So I live in Bowie, which is in the eastern part of the county, eastern central part of the county, and when I was writing this paper, I did not know, but the kind of the major residential part of Bowie was built by Levitt, the Levitt Company. The Levitt Company built suburbs all across, especially the eastern seaboard, and the main one that I know of in Prince George's County is in Bowie. Built tens of thousands of homes, and like many suburban communities that were developed pre-war, post-war, into the late 1960s, did not allow African Americans to live there. And what you see here is an African American who was basically applying to be able to be a homeowner back in 1963 as part of a protest, and he was denied the right to do that. And so the laws on this didn't change for a number of years after 1963. But what was interesting and kind of really disturbing is not only were African Americans not allowed to buy in these places, but the white homeowners were forced to sign a covenant that did not allow them to resell to African Americans. And just a few other pieces of racial history. I'm only going to concentrate on two up here. But there are a number of kind of important instances that occurred. 1978, for folks who live here, you may have heard of TRIM, which stands for the tax reform initiated by Marylanders, which is still in place 50 years later. It really put a cap, as whites were beginning to move out, blacks were beginning to move in, it really put a cap on how much could be raised in terms of taxes, especially to invest in or reinvest in public schools and other public facilities, and put a real crimp in being able to serve especially the new African American population coming into the county in the late 70s, early 80s. The other thing I would point out here, and you may hear more about this as the panel discusses, is that currently in the county there are 70 officers of color that have filed a complaint with the Department of Justice for discrimination in terms of being more harshly disciplined than their white counterparts and being passed up for promotions. And again, this is in a county that is 80+% people of color. So the racial discrimination and the racism exists today. You'll see a picture here, just like at University of Virginia, there are many universities here in the county that exhibited blackface in their yearbooks into the 60s and 70s. And I think Rayshawn mentioned this, but in the paper today, in the Washington Post, was the article showing that the new freshmen, African-American freshmen, dwindled from 12% to 7% from 2016 to 2018, just in 2 years, almost in half. So we have a lot of work to do. So where do we sit in terms of the entire region? There was a really important report that came out 20 years ago by Brookings called A Region Divided, which took a look at the prosperity and equity in the region and said that really the fruits of prosperity have been primarily enjoyed in the western half of the region, that being Northern Virginia, the western parts of Montgomery County, western DC, wards 3, and so on, whereas the eastern half really kind of suffered and didn't prosper anywhere near like its neighbors did, and the highest concentrations of poverty were in the east side of DC and in the inner beltway in Prince George's County, which you can see in the different shades of red. And then in the county itself, it really is a tale of two counties. So as African Americans moved in, they moved into the inner beltway, whites moved into the outer beltway, and then as the years went by, more and more whites actually left the county, more affluent blacks moved into the outside the beltway, and there really is a major kind of dichotomy in affluence between outside the beltway and inside the beltway. So these are kind of the things that all factored into the writing of the paper. At the same time, as I wrote the paper, I knew by work that I've done in the county for more than a decade how many assets that we have here that we can build upon. And so I'm not going to run through this laundry list here, but it's important to know that we have incredible assets here in terms of just where we're located, in terms of the federal facilities, in terms of our transit assets, having more than 30 stations across the county, our research institutions, both federal and academic, our medical institutions. But for me, most importantly, we have a very highly educated population, one of the highest educated populations and in the top tier in the country. So we have a lot to build upon in the county. And that's important for what I'm going to talk about here, which is, again, from Brookings, a quote that really sank in with me, that the modern economy does not reward places equally. Jurisdictions that have been well-positioned in knowledge-intensive sectors have prospered, and those jurisdictions that do not have those knowledge-intensive assets kind of fall behind. And so we are fortunate that we actually do have this in the county and that we can really build upon it. So in a lot of the equity literature that I read as I was writing this paper, there's a lot of focus on how to make prosperity more equitable, how to make development more equitable, but there wasn't a whole lot in the literature about how do you make the local economy grow in the first place. So the first chapter in the paper really focuses on kind of the elements you see around this flywheel. I'm not going to have time, given my time here, to go into them in depth, but really critical to be able to identify your critical industry clusters. For us, that's healthcare and life sciences, it's information technology, it's building around kind of the strength of our federal facilities, it's our kind of business services and business management, and really focus on them, build them up, attract more companies and firms that are doing that kind of work so that we really have very robust sectors. Second is that we invest in innovation, which is the connection to the knowledge-intensive sectors. If you're not kind of in the innovation game, you are guaranteed to fall behind. And the county has done a lot in the last 10 years to kind of reposition itself for some of that. And a lot of that's happening right here in College Park and the investments that the county has made, the city has made, and especially that the university has made both on campus, off campus, around the metro station, and out towards M Square. But I think there are real opportunities in other places of the county, especially around the new University of Maryland Medical Center being built in Largo. That this is the innovation districts in urban areas is where people want to be working, living, and playing. Leveraging anchor institutions. So anchor institutions can be a real engine of the local economy. University of Maryland being a great example of that, the new medical center, but also the community college, Bowie State. They can be real attractors. You can build around kind of the research and patents. And it's really important that the universities see themselves this way and that the county have a partnership with them and the health institutions to really operate in that way. To streamline workforce and talent development, especially to fill the jobs in these higher skilled industries, whether that's true kind of workforce development or it's around building a larger entrepreneurial class. Accelerating transit-oriented development, where development is happening in urban and suburban areas across the country today, is around transit stations. The county is 20, 30 years behind most of the other jurisdictions in the region, and we need to catch up quick, but we need to do it in the right ways. And finally, to do this right, there needs to be a level of collaboration that you don't typically see around economic development and other elements of what I talk about in the report, across the leadership and across the sectors that make this go. So the second chapter focuses on equitable prosperity, defined as an economy in which everyone benefits, everyone has equal access to good jobs and to good education, everyone has access to safe and healthy neighborhoods, which I think Dr. Wilson will hopefully talk about a little bit in the panel talk, that a government that is reliable and accountable, and that a place where everyone is able to build social capital in comparable ways. So I'm going to put up a couple charts here that I think are revealing as I did the research. Both of these also come from Brookings, which has kind of become my regional friend here. And this is looking, in 2005, 2009, they did this study taking a look at the top 100 metro areas in the country. And what they determined was that the metros with the highest inequality were also the metros with the lowest median income. And vice versa, that the metros with the lower inequality also had the higher median income. So that, I think it's right there, there's an economic argument we need to be thinking about besides the moral argument of doing things in a more racially equitable way. Also from Brookings, they continued this study. It's called Metro Monitor, Top 100 Cities, kind of tracking which are the ones that have been able to increase growth, increase prosperity, and increase a kind of inclusive economy. And they only found 11 that had really moved the needle across the country. And these are not kind of your usual suspects. And so we need to learn from these other jurisdictions to see how they are doing this so that we can put those practices into play. So the elements of equitable prosperity they repeat some of the same things for what we need for economic growth, but through a different lens. So anchor institutions can play a critical role. So the University of Maryland is the largest employer in the county, also the largest employer in the Purple Line corridor, going from Prince George's to Montgomery County. The new anchor health institution in Largo will also be a huge employer. And so they have, I believe, they have, it's important that they play prominent roles in ensuring that they hire more local residents, especially residents of color, residents of lower income, that they are doing a lot more business with local small businesses. I don't know what the stats are in Maryland, but a major private university in DC, less than 1% of the procurement they do with small businesses come out of the District of Columbia. So there's a lot of work to do from anchor institutions across the country, true here too. So local hiring, local procurement, local investment in communities. Another key part for the county is to scale up our support for entrepreneurs of color. If you really want to create new engines for the economy, entrepreneurship and small businesses is where it's at. It's where it's been for the last 20 or 30 years. We have a fairly large entrepreneurial class in the county, more than half of which are entrepreneurs of color. But as you might guess, that entrepreneurs of color have the greatest difficulty in having access to capital compared to their white counterparts. So it's really important that we put together an ecosystem that changes that equation in terms of bringing more entrepreneurs into the fold and enabling them to have greater access to capital. And providing services like incubators and accelerators, which are far more common in DC, Northern Virginia, places like Bethesda, than they are here in the county. And also workforce development that's industry-led, because a lot of workforce development that has happened historically, we prepare people for jobs that don't end up being there once people have finished their training. So we really need to be clear from industry what their needs are and in a real-time way figuring out how to fill those different pipelines. And in kind of equitable prosperity, we're looking at living wage jobs and middle skill jobs that are especially targeting people who are either unemployed or underemployed. And then again, needing to focus on a type of cross-sector partnerships that are hard to achieve but critical if you're going to do this right. Then the final major chapter is around equitable development, which is really around making sure that there's quality of life outcomes, especially in the neighborhoods that are changing or transitioning or gentrifying, that affordable housing remains, that people have access to living wage jobs, that they live in healthy environments, which is frequently not the case in lower income communities, whether that's suburban or rural, is also it's also a major issue around transportation equity, that people, especially that need public transportation, they have access to it, to their housing, to their jobs, and to the amenities that they need, and so that those are experienced equitably in the neighborhoods that are redeveloping. So, I don't know if it's going to let me. I like the sound, but I don't know if anyone can help me with I don't know why it's not changing now. But the next slide is about who's most vulnerable to displacement, and it's a lot of the demographics that I just talked about. So the most vulnerable in just about every jurisdiction around the country, and will be true here in Prince George's County if we don't put the right things in place. Communities of color, people over 25 without a bachelor's degree, renters, and we have a higher percentage of renters in the county than anywhere else in the region, people making below 80% of the area median income, and households with children in poverty. So these are the populations that are most vulnerable to the change that we're talking about, and that we really need to kind of concentrate our policies and practices in making sure that they don't get left behind and get pushed out. Thank you, Kate. Some quick housing facts, which I think just kind of brings this point home about the vulnerability of a lot of people in our county. Very high number of people, households in the county that are considered low or very low income. A very high number, over 100,000, that are considered cost burden, which means that they pay 30%, at least 30% of their gross income on housing. And another, or 36,000, which is a sub part of that, are severe cost burden, where they're spending up to 50% of their gross wages on housing and transportation. And then way too many people living in untenable situations, overcrowded or very low quality housing. And the good thing, which I'll talk about, is that the county just put in place, or is putting in place, a new comprehensive housing strategy. So this diagram basically just tries to show the interacting parts of doing equitable development in the right way. So increasing the amount of housing in the county, especially across types and across kind of matching the many different income levels. Zoning that enables that kind of housing to occur in places around the county, especially where there will be greater concentrations of the population, that we're focused on transportation equity, that we're focused on neighborhoods that have been left behind, to invest them in ways where people can continue to prosper in place rather than getting pushed out. And there's also kind of the environmental component to it. The paper has a kind of a final appendix, which reminds us that equity is not just about the economic things that I talked about, but it touches on education, health, environment, and justice too. And we need to be paying more attention to those things as we move forward. So just a few quick thoughts. I would love to see the county put a lot more attention on an anchor collaborative strategy, where a number of the big anchor institutions in the county make a greater commitment to playing a greater role around ensuring equity, as well as being drivers of economic development. So this is all of our universities, this is the community college, it's our hospitals, it's our medical centers, because as you can see kind of around this flower diagram, there's at least 7 significant roles that anchors can and should be playing to make a bigger difference in the places where they reside. Committing to equitable especially equitable transit-oriented development. Like I said, we've got more than 30 stations around the county, most of which are not very well developed. The county is targeting these stations for development, but as we target these, we need to be sure that we're developing in far more equitable ways than has typically been done around transit stations around the region and around the country, so that everyone has an opportunity to kind of share in the prosperity around those transit stations. And then finally, a project that I'm involved in that the University of Maryland is an anchor for with the National Center for Smart Growth in the architectural school. This is a bi-county effort looking at making sure that we have equitable development from New Carrollton all the way to Bethesda, especially for, this is a corridor, especially between New Carrollton and Silver Spring, that has high percentages of immigrants, high percentages of households with lower income. So we need to make sure, kind of in the major ways, that we're making sure small businesses don't get displaced, that we're thinking about workforce development in the right ways, that we're providing a range of housing, especially affordable housing, and that we're supporting the communities that are there to develop around their neighborhoods and their stations in a community and culturally sensitive way. So I will leave you with this diagram. I'm not going to walk you through it, but it is on your handouts. But this is just my attempt to really say, what are the major elements that we need to be thinking about in a more integrated way that focus on greater equity and greater community wealth building? And with that, I'll turn it back over to our hosts.
All right, thank you, Steve. That was great. I think a lot of people in this room heard a lot about Prince George's County that they possibly didn't know, and I think we'll continue to hear that as we move forward. And I think part of kind of thinking through these issues is the role that University of Maryland College Park can play in moving the county and the state forward. And I think the collaboration that we've built with the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund is one of these such examples. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Tonya Wellens, who is the founder of the Prince George's County Social Innovation Fund. She is also the vice president at the Greater Washington Community Foundation, where she leads strategy, grant making, community engagement, and partnerships. Something else that I should note, obviously in our area, we faced the most severe government shutdown in history. Tonya Wellens helped lead a charge to give out over $50,000 to families of government workers. And that's just an example of the type of work that she's doing. So when we talk about change and advocacy, Tonya Wellens is it. Some of the other things that people should take note of prior to joining the foundation. Tonya Wellens was a political appointee for the Obama administration. She was head of global partnerships at the Peace Corps. She's also worked for the World Bank. She has tons of experience, and I'm just excited to have the opportunity to work with her and have her to moderate this particular panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity and that really generous introduction. I appreciate it. So we have quite a bit to do in a very short period of time, and I'm going to do my best to walk us through it. Steve, I just want to acknowledge that it's unfair to have you present 6 months worth of work in 15 minutes, but we really appreciate that you did a fantastic job. Let's give a round of applause for the work that Steve Brigham has done. Again, that work was a labor of love. Steve has spent many years in the county, both as facilitator, but as resident and partner and citizen, and so it's so nice to see that work come to light. I am excited to bring forth an incredible panel. We're going to do our best to bring them up very quickly, have them offer a few thoughts in response to the paper, but also in response to their own varied experiences, and then we're going to create a short window for you all to ask some questions or to present some thoughts. I don't know that there's any more important topic that we could be discussing today than pursuing racial equity. There's no more important place than to be discussing it here at the University of Maryland in Prince George's County at this particular time right now. So I'd like to invite our first panelist to come and join us. Steve, why don't you join us back on the stage, because we'd also like to filter questions your way. You can join us right at the end. Brittany Drakeford. Brittany is a member of Gethsemane United Methodist Church in Cottage City. She is a believer in fate, the practice of combining faith, arts, and technology to energize communities to create equitable places for generations today and tomorrow. She's a sixth-generation Prince George's County resident and is interested in the legacies of African American communities in the county and the ways in which the built environment holds the memories of discrimination and segregation. She has been a historian for Prince George's County for many years and works as a senior planner in the county's Department of Planning. Brittany Draper. I'm excited to meet for the first time Mr. Marcus Bullock. Mr. Marcus Bullock is the CEO of Flip Shop. He is an entrepreneur, justice reform advocate, and a public speaker. Following his 2004 release from prison, he launched a construction business that grew to over 18 employees. He's also the founder and CEO of Flick Shop, a free app that enables incarcerated people to receive personalized postcards from their families, including community members. He's committed to reducing recidivism, and he teaches entrepreneurship to returning citizens. Let's give a round of applause for Mr. Bullock. I'm happy to invite Amy Kincaid, an old friend of mine. Amy is the Chief Program Officer at Bali. Is it Bali or Bal? Bali, I thought that was right. In her role, she supports and guides activities that are designed to shift capital, to scale sustainable enterprise, and to change economic systems towards equity and justice. She also taught at the University of Maryland. She taught social entrepreneurship and founded a company, Change Matters, over 20 years ago. It was one of the country's first benefit LLCs. Amy. And I'd also like to invite Dr. Jacoby Wilson. He is no stranger, I imagine, to many of you in this room. He's an associate professor with the University of Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health and Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics in the School of Public Health here at the University of Maryland. He is an environmental health scientist with over 10 years of experience working in community university partnerships on environmental health and justice issues. There's so much more. Please join us on the stage. There's so much more that I could say about everyone's bio who is on this dais, but we just don't have the time to go through it all. So I want to go ahead and launch right into our panel discussion. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to just very quickly, recognizing that there is no single dimension to a conversation about race or race equity or the pursuit of racial equity. But if they would just reflect around what it means from each of their own vantage points to pursue racial equity and to open with any personal experiences or reflections on the paper or the current context, I'd love for us to get started there. And why don't we just start with you, Dr. Wilson, if that's okay.
I mean, try not to be too long-winded for those of you who know me, so we don't have a lot of time. So when you think about race, I actually talked in one of my classes about racism and health issues. And we talked about Kamara Jones's Gardener's Tale and the 3 different forms of racism. And we talked about, the role of structural racism and how that leads to differential opportunity. And I appreciate Steve's presentation because what I gotta is we gotta focus on making sure there's equity and opportunity. We have too many people, too many children, for example, who've been thrown away. I'll just mention lead, for example. We know we have some of the highest rates of lead exposure in Baltimore. If you think about what happened in Flint, when children are exposed to lead, they basically have neurocognitive impacts, right? So lead is in public health, we dropped the ball on lead, right? That's a social justice issue. And when a kid's exposed to lead, you put a cap on that opportunity and that future, that potential. So we probably thrown away future doctors, lawyers, physicians, people who could have an impact because we did not feel like, because of the color of their skin, that we could do more to invest in them. And when you think about these issues that we're talking about on this dais today and in Steve's presentation, you gotta think about How are we addressing racism and recognizing the humanity in people? Environmental justice movement as a movement is about recognizing the humanity in every citizen. And we think about these issues of racism, we are not valuing everyone equally. We're not providing for opportunities for growth, everyone equally, and we're not giving people the opportunity to tap into their full potential equally. And that's when I think about equity, that's important to me. When I think about public health and health equity, that's important to me. And it's also important to me just to be quiet, to make sure that folks who are most impacted, that have been underserved, the ones that have been made invisible, let them lead the way. So it's just not about community engagement. It needs to be community driven, and students heard me say this, it needs to be of the community, for the community, and by the community. UMD is just not good enough. You're in College Park. The people who reside in College Park need to be driving what you do as an institution. So folks out in the audience and residents that hold us more accountable as anchor institutions need to hold our county officials more accountable in their roles. Need to hold other folks more accountable and make sure everyone has access to prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Amy, you want to jump in?
What else is there to be
I
said?
know. There's much more to be said.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me, one of the many things that struck me about this paper is just the reminder and recognition of the racial demographics of higher ed in general, and this university in particular, versus the racial demographics of the country and this county and community in particular. And there's an elegance, you know, it's not an issue, it's not an argument of elegance that it's wrong that it doesn't match. It's not about elegance, it's about equity and justice. And who has voice and who has say, right? And who has responsibility. I think Tony's opening was a little bit, you know, how do you feel about this personally? And I'm hyper aware in settings like this of being, you know, a white person on a panel and trying not to take too much space. But I invite, especially my other folks who identify as white, to just be sort of hyper aware of your positioning in a room and how you use it and how you use it well. And I try to think harder and harder as I get older and older about when to step in and when to step back.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, sir.
You know, I'm so grateful for the presentation. It's awesome to be able to hear and see the data that supports the life that I am succumbed to live every day. So, you know, it's cool to see that on the screen. To give a little bit of context, I want to address the elephant in the room because it was in my bio, but I went to prison when I was 15 years old. It was one of the worst decisions I made to steal a car from someone, and it landed me in front of a judge listening to him sentence me to 8 years in adult maximum security prisons as a kid. And so I grew up in prison from my, you know, early teens all the way into my early 20s. And when I was released in 2004, when I knew that I wanted to start a business, that's when I was introduced to a lot of the racial inequalities that were displayed on the screen just earlier. So as we think about the solutions that you presented just a few moments ago, I'm really, really excited about hearing people talk about, you know, investing in not only just innovation and entrepreneurship, but in entrepreneurs that look like me, that sound like me, that come from the communities that I come from, that still live in the county like me, but they just aren't aware of all of the gems that are happening in so many of the communities that I just haven't had access to. So opening up the doors to access is obviously an important part of not only my own personal journey, but all of the peers whom I work to impact inside of the community still. As we think about what business accelerators could look like, intentional mentorship, you know, anchoring institutions and how they're investing in entrepreneurs that want to build the innovations like the ones that I'm working on now. I get excited because I have all of you incredible thinkers and brilliant people that are building some of these solutions that I'm going to be applying to and talking about all week long when I leave this room today. So thank you for catching me later and talking to me about what you're doing in the community so that I can be your biggest cheerleader, because it's very, very, very necessary. I had to jump over a ton of barriers as I got to fight toward this stage today. And I just want to bring so many more people with me that live in the same neighborhoods that I grew up in inside of the county.
Thank you very much.
So it's definitely very interesting being last to answer this question and hearing what everyone has to say, and all of it resonating with me so much. And so when I heard Steve's presentation and I watched it, it made me think that is my family's history. So like that is the story. So knowing that in 1855, I can find look at the census and actually find one of my ancestors, and looking and connecting with that, and hearing the stories of my grandmother who attended Highland Park Elementary School, which was a segregated school, and then hearing about my father who also attended a segregated school, and then being a part of a family where I was the first generation in a community that they had lived in for 6 generations to go to an integrated school, but yet it was still pretty much segregated. So to hear that information and to watch the presentation really resonates with me. How do I feel about it? I think that this is hearing the data, but then also being able to connect the data with the stories of the community is really important. So what are those stories? Steve mentioned Bowie and the Levittown, but we also have stories like Lakeland that was destroyed as a part of urban renewal, that was a historically Black community. We have the Meadows community that was out towards Upper Marlboro that was destroyed by Andrews Air Force Base and the Joint Base Andrews. So there are a lot of legacies of African-American communities in Prince George's County, and those stories have just been hidden, and they're lost in the wind. And so I think that as we start to look at building an equitable Prince George's County, we also have to think about how do we go find those stories that have been lost? How do we bring those back to the forefront? Because if we're not aware of those stories, then we're gonna be doomed to repeat some of those same things that we've done.
Thank you, Brittany. So if you all should have some note cards in your chairs. My ask is that you go ahead and write down your questions, and I don't know who the collectors of those cards are, but if you collect them, send them down to the ends of the rows, and we'll make sure that we start to filter some of those questions. In the paper, Prince George's Rising, Steve notes a number of key strategies to ensure equitable prosperity and development, and they include bolstering the skills of residents, especially lower income, for middle skilled and higher skilled jobs, scaling up support for entrepreneurs of color, implementing policies that prevent displacement and preserve affordable housing, implementing the county's new comprehensive strategy in alignment with the county's new zoning ordinance, ensuring transit-oriented development is planned and delivered with equity as a priority, and investing capital and resources that effectively benefit underserved neighborhoods and their residents. Equity is about social policy, but it's also about economic policy. I'd love it if our panelists would just spend a few minutes talking about these notions of investing in entrepreneurship, about where county resources and local resources go, about options and opportunities to both repair and restore our history of discrimination and disinvestment. Who wants to start? Dr. Wilson?
Yeah, I was gonna chime in on the zoning issue a little bit.
Please.
Can I talk about that?
Yeah.
And I know Brittany would chime in as well. I think when we think about zoning and community development, I think it's important to really understand how, in some cases in our county, we've zoned some communities as industrial, right? So it speaks back to my earlier point about how we value people and humanity. If you zone a community as industrial, or you have an industrial zone near a community that's residential, that means you're putting hazards, right? You're putting in pollution-intensive facilities near those communities. And so that needs to be addressed. We have a concept called eco-districts. We've had a concept called environmental benefits districts, where communities that may have been underserved, that may have had a lot of environmental hazards, may have a lot of pollution, let's invest in those communities, as already said. So you can do that through community development block grants. We can do that through watershed restoration grants. We had a program in our county called Transformer Neighborhood Initiative. So those locations were actually communities that were underserved. You can look at Langley Park. You can look at, I think part of Sheriff Road maybe area, Capitol Heights area, which lost its grocery store. I'm talk about that. And so, but that program, it came out of the, I think, policing, because of the issues around policing, and it's a way to holistically do community building, but we haven't seen an evaluation of what's the impact of that. Right. So take that TNI, Transform Neighborhood Initiative program, and do more to make it work for communities. We have to do zoning that's more green zoning and healthy zoning. We have one of the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, and limited access to supermarkets at a county level across the state, in this county, okay? So we have people who are living in food deserts and food swamps. That's a development issue. That's an investment issue. That's a zoning issue, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we change how we zone and do community development, we can make sure people have equal access to good transportation, good housing, and access to good food infrastructure. And to me, you cannot have a healthy community if you folks don't have access to a healthy environment. Brittany?
So no, I definitely think that all the points that Dr. Wilson mentioned those are really accurate. So, and I would even go further. I would even say, how are we even training employees? So how do we look at staff training to make sure that staffing is looking at racial equity in taking that framework and taking that approach to the work that we do? How do we look at community engagement, as you mentioned, is not just something that we do just to check a box, or it's not just engaging the community, but we really see community engagement and community education as a method through which we exchange information and exchange knowledge so that communities can then become to advocate for themselves and advocate for their needs and the desires that they have in their respective communities. From very specific policies, we can look at affordable housing. Prince George's County does not have an affordable housing policy. There's an extreme demand for affordable housing in Prince George's County today. That's one very immediate issue. If we talk about access doesn't just mean that the job exists. Access also means that an individual can physically move there. So we can do transit-oriented development, but transit-oriented development also needs to make sure that it looks at public transportation like bus systems. So we can develop at metro stations, but do we also have public amenities that can move people from Mitchellville, so maybe from 214 to Largo Town Center. That also means looking at sidewalk connections. Prince George's County has some of the highest rates of pedestrian fatalities in the state of Maryland, so we consistently rank either 1 or 2, so consistently at the top. And as we see displacement from Washington, D.C., as we see more people moving to the outer ring suburbs in Prince George's County, we see increased pedestrian fatalities along Pennsylvania Avenue, which is Route 4, Maryland 214, Central Avenue. So these major highways that pretty much the State Highway Administration has said that these are our roadways in which we're trying to move people from outside of Prince George's County into D.C. to get to where the jobs are. And the people who end up being the victims tend to be residents who are walking because there are inadequate sidewalk connections. We might have gaps. I walk it frequently when I walk from my house to a local bakery where there is just like a bus stop that is just in the grass. And it's like, well, who can walk to a bus stop that's in the grass? But I do, and I have to walk on the street next to a train track. And so, those are inevitably hazards. So I definitely want to just reiterate some of the points that Dr. Wilson brought up.
Yes, please.
Can Marcus and I weigh in on the entrepreneurship piece?
Please
You got a
do.
little time for us?
That'd be
to
great, I
put
do.
out too?
Yep.
This paper, what strikes me about the volume and the depth and the breadth of this paper, there's a lot to take in. Would you be willing to say a little bit about the excitement and maybe challenges of entrepreneurs like you, who are seeking investment to grow a successful company? I mean, you've already tested that it works. You've got a good business, but you're now in growth. And then maybe I can say a little bit about a couple of national models
That'd be great.
that are good to maybe look at.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for asking. So I'm a CEO and I'm also a salesman, so I can go on and talk about all of the wonderfulness of Flick Shop, download Flick Shop. But instead of doing that, what I'll do is I'll tell a quick story. So I came home from prison when I was in 2004, and it was very, very hard for me to be able to get a job. I was 23 years old, and I could really not even explain where I had been for almost the last decade of my life. I lived in Lanham, Maryland, so inside, I thought in the Beltway, and after about 141, on the 142nd job application, I finally was able to get a job at a paint store. So I finally got a job at a paint store, and I started to build this relationship with the people, the customers that came in the paint store, and eventually I became the conduit between the customers who wanted to have their kitchens painted and the contractors who complained about it not being enough work in the county. And so I started a painting business, and that painting business grew to a really awesome company. And then later on, my friends that were in prison that I grew up with, they reminded me the importance and value of receiving mail in prison because there's no internet there. And I didn't have really a bunch of time to write them letters and send them pictures the way that my mom did while I was there. So I told myself I wanted to be able to build a technology platform that allowed me to be able to do it seamlessly. We built FlickShop, and our mobile app allows our users to be able to take a picture, add some quick text, press send, and for 99 cents, we take that picture and text and print it on a real tangible postcard, send it to any person in any prison anywhere in the country. We've connected over 140,000 families around the country, and one of the most impactful mobile applications inside the iOS App Store. The reason why I tell that story is while I'm very, very excited about the direction that our company is growing and the growth that we're experiencing, but I'll tell you one of the hardest parts about the journey has been raising money as a black founder that has a felony, that lives in a county, and kind of sort of has this stigma that's attached to him that prevents me from gaining access into a lot of the rooms that some of my counterparts have. There was a business accelerator called Techstars. They're based out of Boulder, Colorado, and they invested in us and gave us $100,000 along with 3 months of mentorship. That opportunity allowed us to be able to 3x our business revenue and bring on other investors like the ex-NBA player, Baron Davis, and singer, John Legend, who both invested in our company. Now, the reason why I talk about that one piece of nugget, that one opportunity, that one interview that allowed us to be able to get in, just gain access, that came 5 years later after I started my business back in 2011. I'm sorry, 6 years later after we started our business back in 2012. 6 years it took us to be able to bang down doors just to be able to get one $100,000 investment. And then we 3X'd our business. The 3X is important because that shows what the power of believing in someone and investing inside of this community can do. But the story behind the business also talks about the diversity and inclusion that needs to be inside of rooms that allows us to be able to see the solutions that can be built when we invest in, again, founders that look like me and come from our neighborhoods. When we talk about entrepreneurship and racial sensitivity and how we need to be a little bit more inclusive, it's not just because we want to check a box. It's because there are real solutions out there that are looming, that are just waiting for the right access point to be able to insert themselves inside of the world. And I'm grateful to be able to be the one of the poster children that can talk about this, because not only is it necessary just for people that look like me, but there are tons of people that don't look like me who still just don't have access. How are we being thoughtful about opening up those doors and being a little bit more inclusive? That's where I like to spend a lot of my time, and I'm grateful that we're having conversations like these, because I think that these were the first steps of where it happens.
Thank you very much, Marcus. That story absolutely needed to have been told. I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to respond to some of the students' questions, and so I will put this question out to the panel while I read a couple more things that have come through that I think are important and worthy of addressing. But the questions that are so heartwarming to me, and I appreciate being in a student audience, because sometimes when we're talking, we're always talking about things that the county should do and people should do who are not necessarily in this room right now. And so the overwhelming number of questions we've received from the audience include, what is it that we can do? What is it that I, as a University of Maryland student, should be thinking about now and in the future in terms of pursuing an agenda around racial equity? And this is a really, really important question. And so I'd like to ask anyone on the panel to take a quick response on that. Or as you're thinking about it.
I can respond to it.
Please, yeah.
So on campus, there's a student organization called 17 for Peace and Justice. It's based off the 17 principles of environmental justice. The first People of Color Summit in 1991 established what are the principles of environmental justice. So the goals for this student group is to learn about environmental justice, engage the campus community in environmental justice, and then try to impact those issues in Prince George's County. So if you want to learn about environmental justice, how to get engaged, fight for change, fight for people's humanity, join 17 for Peace and Justice. For some reason, we can't get students to join the organization. And I'm not sure what's going on, but it's about really impacting these issues every day and making a difference in people's lives in our county. So there you go. That's one.
I'm going to build on that a little bit if I could.
That'd be great.
So I know because of the classes that I taught in the last couple of years that there's a lot of experiential learning or courses that, especially in professional writing, y'all have to take, I don't know if you call it junior English or whatever. I know you love that class. But there are papers and there are projects in almost everybody's experience at the university. Really think about if you can make those projects as real as possible, and look to your professors and look to others in the community to see, and clubs and student groups to see if you can learn more about the community in which you're working, and see if you can adapt those assignments in a way that is actually real. It will benefit you. It could possibly benefit the community partners if your professor is good about that. And it could make a difference in the community, and it could get you started on the road to really being social entrepreneurs or really making social change that matters.
One more quick thing. We do a lot of work in the county in our community engagement, research and practice work. So I'm gonna do one more pitch for my lab. I forgot to notice what looking at me. So Siege Lab, CEEJH lab.org. Just go there, you'll understand why. We look at Mid-Atlantic, we do a lot of work in the county, engaging communities from Bladensburg, Brandywine. We're doing stuff on food. We have a whole food equity project. We have a park equity project because a lot of communities of color don't have access to parks and green space, right? We're mapping out disparities, and then we're trying to map where we want to invest in communities in the county. So that's 17 for Peace and Justice and siegelab.org, two places where if you want to get engaged, please look at those resources.
Okay, Brittany?
And I want to just add in, so as a sixth-generation native, stepping off the campus, when I was a college student in Greensboro, North Carolina, it wasn't until I actually walked from downtown, from my dorm to downtown, did I really start to explore Greensboro. So step off of campus and step out of College Park and explore all that Prince George's County has to offer. I mean, there are farms that you can hang out at. There are, well, I don't know how old everyone is, but there are farm wineries. There are a lot of different amenities that Prince George's County has to offer, and so it's not all gloom and doom. I think at a certain point in time, there was this period where the university didn't even necessarily acknowledge that it was in Prince George's County. And so what does it look like to actually go and explore the community in a broader sense, to visit perhaps Brandywine, visit where Wilmer's Park used to be, where James Brown performed, go visit some of these places in the community.
Great, so I have two more quick questions, and then I know we have to transition. I can't believe we're running out of time because this is like the best conversation in the shortest amount of time possible. But one of the questions notes that of 4,714 freshmen who came to the university, 554 were Black. All other enrollments are up, but Black enrollment is down. How does our institution, so mired in anti-Blackness, work toward gaining Black students from PGCPS? This is an important question, and I wonder if there are any of our panelists who have some thoughts about it.
I think y'all have feels about it.
Yeah, we got feels.
Why don't we start there?
I'll just say, I think the reason why you have that drop in enrollment, it's about leadership. I said it before, if you don't value people, why am I going to come to your campus? You don't even value me. You had a young man who was murdered by a student in kinesiology in the School of Public Health. Then you had a young man who died on a football player who died. And the leadership, in my opinion, did not step up to show, we value you. You could have stepped up. Now, maybe some of the things were out of hand, they couldn't control, but we're stepping up quickly and not just being reactive, but being proactive. We've had nuisance on this campus for several years. We've had hate speech on this campus for several years. We have 5% faculty of color over the last 20 years. So it's not just a student enrollment is an issue. We don't have faculty of color. on this campus. So we have a lot, it's about investing. If you're serious about it, it's intentionality. There's been a lack of intentionality in addressing these issues. And as a student of color, if I was a high school student, I wouldn't want to come here either because you show that you don't value me. So people need to step up from the top of the administration down to the chairs and make sure that folks who are about community, about people of color, want to make sure we advance that agenda, that their voices are heard. And I don't think enough of that's been done in a serious, consistent manner. I'll be quiet.
So there are far more questions than I think we have the time to pursue, and I'm looking to my leadership here in the front. I don't know that there's one more question. How do we make sure that access to opportunity and resources is not only equitable, but reparative and takes into account previous injustices? It has to be restorative. It's not just looking ahead at what we do now. It's also looking back and looking at things that have to be restored and repaired. And I just wonder if anyone wants to add anything to that.
I can talk, but I'm going to pass the mic.
So I think this is, again, where the stories of a community really matter. So we can look at the data from a very macro level, so we can look at it from a county perspective, but we have to really be able to drill down to understand specifically what were some of those policies, where are some of the places where communities have received most of the burdens. So I think that's probably one of the first places where you start in order to do some of that reparation, is to consider where are those places. I know Dr. Wilson has been doing some mapping around looking at land use in the county as it relates to other social determinants of health and also race, but first identifying those places, but then also saying, well, what communities were deed covenants? Where were those anyway? We can look at Capitol Heights. There were deed covenants in Capitol Heights. We can look at Hyattsville. The city of Hyattsville right now is doing a really good job at going back, working with their CDC to identify properties that have racially restricted deed covenants on there. We can look at communities where the mayor of a community, this was in the 50s, but where the mayor of the community was a part of the Ku Klux Klan. So what does that mean? So actually being able to identify those places to understand, first, what is the framework of where we're existing in our community? And then once we get that information, then we can start to build on it, because we can't pay somebody back if we don't know what we owe them and the ways in which we've damaged and destroyed them.
So I'll just wrap up by saying that this conversation is far from over. Actually, it is just the beginning for many of you and actually for many of us. The importance of you in this room right now, even if you, hopefully you will step off the campus of University of Maryland and spend some time in Prince George's County. But even if you don't spend much time in the county, you will end up somewhere in the world in a role that will have you making important decisions. It is likely your generation that will be having the hard conversation about restoration and reparations and decision-making that will enable us to pursue a real agenda around racial equity. I hope that this conversation and the paper that Steve spent so much time pursuing is just the seed, the seed that will enable you to think back, refer back to, use this as a reference point in your decision making. Thank you all very much for your time.
Please give a round of applause for the panelists and to Tanya for doing such a beautiful job. Thank you. I think this is probably just the beginning of many more conversations like this, because I think there's much work to be done, and we've gotten some beautiful ideas, great ideas today to pursue, and I hope that you will follow some of those suggestions that were made, especially joining that student club that Dr. Wilson mentioned. I wanted to acknowledge again Dr. Rayshawn Ray and his continued support of collaborating with the Baha'i Chair. It's really important that both of us do this, because I couldn't do this without him. Thank you, Dr. Ray. I I just want to bring to your attention that we have, maybe that's the end of the slides, but if you go to our website, on March 12th, again, Critical Race Initiative and the Baha'i Chair are featuring a lecture by Dr. Catherine Knight Steele called Black Girl Labor as Magic, Toward Understanding of Digital Feminism. Again, March 12th, next month. I hope that you can join us. It'll be in the Stamp Union building, and it'll be a very important presentation by Dr. Knight Steele. Thank you very much for being here with us today. There are some cookies in the back. Take them with you.